Hi, friends. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that happened yesterday. I was having a conversation with my kids because they had lost their electronics because they weren't taking care of their responsibilities and they were kind of just being mean to each other. And, they do what normal kids do. They're like, when can we have it back? Like to tears, to the point of tears, like they wanted their TV back and their tablets and all this other stuff. And it got me thinking, like, why is that the only thing you care about? Why do you care so much about that? But you want to, kind of ignore the other things. And through that conversation, I started realizing something like I do the same exact thing. I put other things above what truly matters. And maybe it's not a tablet or a video game. Um, for me, sometimes it's probably a video game, but it could be social media, it could be work or sports, um, it could be YouTube. Maybe it's just sitting in front of the TV after a long day. And I don't think that those things in and of themselves are necessarily sinful, but it got me thinking that the problem is when those things slowly begin taking place, or they're taking the place of things that actually do matter. And at that time, through that conversation, I felt God was, started to speak into my heart because I started thinking about all the times that I've said to my kids, I don't have enough time today. I can't do that with you today. There's just not enough time. Or I didn't have enough time to pray. Or I didn't have enough time to read my Bible. But I got to be honest with you. Sometimes I did have the time. I just gave that time to something else. And when that hit me, that was hard. Because the more I sat with that, the more I realized that this wasn't just about electronics or my kids being upset about electronics. I think it was about priorities. Because again, all of those things in and of itself are not sinful. But the moment that they begin taking the place of the things that God has entrusted us with, I think that's when we have to stop and ask ourselves, like, how did I get to this point? Because it didn't happen overnight. I think it was through little choices, one after another, um, that slowly began shaping my priorities. Because nobody has to remind me to check my phone, or nobody has to remind me to turn my TV on, and nobody has to remind me to play a game. But sometimes I do need reminded to pray, or I need that reminder that I need to open up the Bible and spend time in God's Word. And sometimes I even need to be reminded to be present with my family. And that spiraled into another question, like, why is it the things that truly give our lives meaning? Why are those the things that we have to remind ourselves to do? Because I think that's why Jesus talked so much about our hearts, because whatever we constantly give our attention to will eventually tell us what's important. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it's something I was telling my kids all as well. Like, I, as a father, I'm not trying to take good things away from you, but I do know that whatever you make most important, you know, those habits are going to shape you. They're going to shape who you're becoming. And it's the same thing when Jesus said that, because he knows whatever we treasure, those are the things that are going to help shape us. And yesterday, that was one of the hardest realizations for me, because I realized that my kids aren't just listening to the words that I say. They're not just listening to what I say matters. They're actually watching what matters to me. They're watching what gets my attention. They're watching what gets my energy. They're watching what I make time for. And I think that's true for all of us, because our lives are always teaching somebody something. And, yesterday I thought I was teaching my kids about responsibility and discipline. And I walked away realizing God was teaching me about priorities, because the conversation started with, my kids wanting their electronics back. But by the end of it, I couldn't stop thinking about those things that I keep reaching for. And it's not because my phone is bad or my Xbox or PlayStation is bad. I think it's because I've realized that those things can slowly start becoming more important than people, than responsibilities, than those things come more important than my relationship with God. But today, it's not about waking up and feeling guilty about that realization. I think it's about slowly starting to pay more attention to what we give our energy to what we say is more important to us. Um, you know, because the things we say, the things we do, those things will actually show us what's important. Our actions will do that. And I kind of walked away like, do I have an idol? Do I have an idol? But I think the better question is like, what am I reaching for first? Because throughout everything in my life, God has been teaching me, not just in church or through the Bible or through making these YouTube videos. I mean, God has been teaching me everywhere through conversations, through ministry, yesterday through my kids, through everyday life. Um, and I think this was one of those moments where I thought I was teaching my kids, but God was teaching their dad. And I think I needed this lesson more than they did. Because how many times have my kids watched dad come home, sit down, scroll through his phone? How many times have my kids come over and be like, Dad, I want to show you this? And I say, oh, just a minute, because I'm scrolling through my phone. What I am doing is I'm showing my kids that whatever I'm doing on my phone is more important than what they have. So why wouldn't they default to an electronic? Why wouldn't they be upset when that one thing is taken away from them? So, before we distract ourselves again, before we reach for our phone, before we turn on the TV, let's just slow down and ask God what matters today. Because what constantly gets our attention, I think that's shaping the people we're becoming and the people around us. So I just wanted to share that because I think in everyday moments, God is teaching us something. Be a conversation with your spouse, with a coworker, with a friend. The things that we see other people doing, we don't ever really stop and think like, maybe I'm doing that too. And yesterday was one of those moments where I was trying to teach my kids something, and God ended up teaching me. So thanks for spending a few moments with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. All right. God bless, friends.